Right, so the government's own figures have given the game away, it seems, because buried in a Department for Business and Trade fact sheet dated the 31st of October, because Halloween is frankly the perfect day to release news like this, it says exports to Israel rose 10.5% to £3.6 billion in the year to June 2025. That's from the previous June. So this is basically Keir Starmer's first year in power. And it happened while Gaza continued to be burned and Labour claimed to have paused a trade deal out of principle. The truth is, they only paused the headlines, and those billions they've just announced, well, they're just the part they're willing to print. It's just the tip of the iceberg, because they don't include everything. They don't include the arms licenses, or the MOD contracts, or the offshore finance and the hidden service deals. They all sit below the waterline. What they published is just the tip. What they're profiting from is the iceberg. And for a government that talks so much about moral clarity, it's remarkable how much they've managed to hide, and now it's going to blow up in their face. Right, so the figures are not leaked, they're not hearsay, they're the government's own numbers we're talking about here, sitting quietly in a Department for Business and Trade fact sheet from Halloween. In the 12 months to the end of June of 2025, the first full year of Keir Starmer's premiership basically, so this is on him, British exports to Israel rose by £342 million, up 10.5% to £3.6 billion. Imports from Israel dipped slightly to £2.6 billion, though, a 4.6% fall. People here not wanting to buy Israeli, it seems, or invest in a nation so destabilised by its own crackpot and genocidal government. But actually, that's only a small part of the truth. The total value of trade between the two countries reached £6.2 billion, actually, a 3.7% increase on the previous year. Those numbers appear under the seal of His Majesty's government, not in a campaign pamphlet. They are official, therefore, and they are shameful. The contradiction is, in and of itself, damaging enough to Starmer's regime. In public, the Labour government told the country it had paused talks on a new UK-Israel free trade agreement. In private, or at least on paper, trade was still climbing. What was frozen was not the money, just the accountability. The figures show that far from retreating, Britain deepened its commercial ties at the very moment it claimed to be distancing itself. The data is proof that policy and principle have drifted apart, if they were ever even on the same page when it comes to someone like Keir Starmer. The detail makes it plainer still. Goods exports totaled £2.3 billion, up 4.4%. Services exports £1.9 billion, up 16.5%. The biggest growth came in finance, insurance, professional consulting, and technology services, as it happens. So, the city, in other words. What expanded was Britain's white-collar stake in Israel's economy. The downturn in imports was driven mainly by lower pharmaceutical and chemical shipments, not by any moral embargo on behalf of this government. Nothing in the data suggests any ethical decisions being made, though. Everything suggests market continuity, the ebb and flow of the markets. Nothing has functionally changed at all. But even this apparently complete data set, as bad a look as it is already, hides far more than it reveals. The ONS data set that underpins the government fact sheet only records transactions declared through ordinary customs and corporate reporting. It counts goods with barcodes and services with invoices. What it excludes is the web of licenses and permissions and contracts and capital flows that form the real economy of political power. The absence of these categories is what gives ministers deniability on such things, you see. When they say trade is mostly civilian, they're speaking literally, but not truthfully. Start with arms and dual-use goods. The government's own export control data, kept in a separate database, lists £560 million in licenses to Israel since 2015 and £42 million approved in 2023. As of December of 2024, there were 368 active licenses and, of course, those 16 they suspended. These permissions cover aircraft parts, targeting systems, electronic components that can be used in both civilian and military equipment. None of that appears in the ONS trade tables. When those parts ship, they are coded as electrical instruments or mechanical components, lost amongst thousands of civilian entries. That's how a war economy passes itself off as commerce. The Commons Library briefing, labelled CBP 9964, confirms the scale but not the shipments. The government refuses to publish fulfilment values, so the public can see how much has been authorised but not how much has been delivered. The result ends up being a statistical black box, if you like, in which moral responsibility disappears. As long as licenses exist, exports can continue. As long as they're coded generically, the trade statistics stay clean on paper. Then there are the procurement airports that don't exist on paper either. The Ministry of Defence buys Israeli origin systems directly. The Watchkeeper drone programme worth £800 million. The Project Corvus replacement tender, £130 million launched in July of this year. These are paid from defence budgets and booked as government expenditure, not as imports. The equipment arrives, the money leaves, but the national accounts don't record it as trade with Israel. That's how the MOD can keep saying there's no significant import flow while operating aircraft and surveillance systems literally built on Israeli technology. Financial and investment flows add another layer of invisibility. The DBT factsheet lists Britain's outward investment position in Israel at minus £6.6 billion at the end of 2023, meaning British investors have more money parked there than Israeli investors hold here. It also notes that inward investment data are not available. In government language, that means withheld for disclosure reasons. Israeli capital in British real estate, tech, and defence manufacturing is substantial, but because it's classed as ownership and not trade, it vanishes again from the export-import balance. Profits repatriated to Israel are recorded as primary income, again outside the trade ledger. In both directions, capital moves without political visibility. The same trick applies to services that cross borders digitally. Cybersecurity contracts, fintech partnerships, data analytics and software licensing generate hundreds of millions in revenue. But most of it is booked through European or American subsidiaries. The money never appears in the UK-Israel line because the invoices end up being paid from Dublin or Amsterdam or Delaware. The ONS notes asymmetries due to third country routing in its methodology, a bureaucratic phrase if ever there was one, but it hides the geopolitical one. Plausible deniability. London's financial sector sits at the centre of that network. Banks provide clearing and risk management for Israeli corporations. Insurers underwrite Israeli shipping and aviation. Reinsurers handle regional risk portfolios. These flows are recorded in aggregate in the Bank of England's financial account statistics, but not by partner country. When the Treasury claims that trade with Israel represents a small share of total UK trade, it omits these financial services entirely. In reality, the city's exposure is strategic. Small in percentage terms, large in political protection. Even within the published trade data, certain categories are redacted for confidentiality. The ONS suppresses country-specific values where they could identify individual companies or contracts. In practice, this often means arms, surveillance technology, or high-value components. The same suppression applies to exports routed through the United States as part of joint manufacturing programs. For example, components for the F-35 fighter jet are of course made here in Britain, as we know, shipped to the US for assembly and then supplied to Israel under US contracts. In the UK statistics, they register as exports to America and not to Israel, and our government can then say it doesn't sell whole weapons to Israel while very much still providing the parts. And it's these structural gaps, the official £6.2 billion figure represents only the visible layer of a much larger economic relationship. Add the licensed but unreported arms trade, the MOD procurements, the capital and investment flows, the financial services revenue. The true value is likely several £billion higher. That isn't speculation, it's inference from the government's own compartmentalised data. Each category exists, each is acknowledged somewhere in the official record, but none are included in the total the public is told. The fragmentation serves a political purpose. It lets ministers control the story. When critics point to arms exports, they cite the trade fact sheet that shows mostly pharmaceuticals and machinery. When activists call for a boycott, they claim total trade is only a fraction of UK output. The small print then does the heavy lifting. What isn't measured can't be debated. The bureaucracy ends up providing the cover. So to see the full picture, you have to stitch the fragments together. The DBT fact sheet gives the export and import values. The Commons Library briefing gives the license totals. The MOD tender database gives the procurement numbers. The Pink Book explains the off-balance sheet income. None of these data sets contradict each other. They simply don't touch. And that separation is what allows ministers to claim transparency while practicing concealment. The paperwork tells the story if you read what's missing. This concealment obviously has practical consequences, doesn't it? Every hidden export line represents a contract that can proceed without public scrutiny. Every unaccounted financial flow shields corporate profit from moral review. When parliamentarians ask how Britain is helping Israel's military campaign, officials can truthfully answer that recorded trade is mostly civilian because the record itself has been written to exclude what actually matters. The design converts complicity into deniability, and this structure didn't begin with Starmer, but his government has inherited and perfected it. The fact sheet published last month is his government's document. The data covers his first year in power. Under the previous administration, the pattern was already visible, but the language has hardened. The current DBT release drops earlier references to enhanced transparency and replaces them with standard statistical disclaimers. The rhetoric of reform has disappeared. In its place sits managerial continuity, a government that sees data not as accountability but as narrative control. And the effect is corrosive. When economic relationships are hidden behind classification codes, the public cannot judge the ethics of the full breadth of policy, though we've certainly got enough to go on to treat it negatively, to say the least. We are talking about Israel here. But it's barely half the story. When those codes disguise military and financial flows, the state can continue business with regimes accused of atrocity while maintaining an image of restraint. The numbers, even incomplete, still tell the truth. Britain is profiting from its connection to Israel during the Gaza genocide. The scale of that profit is larger than the declared totals, and the structure of official reporting ensures it stays that way. This is why the official figure matters. £6.2 billion. It's not just a number. It's the visible tip of a system built to conceal itself. It's the part of the iceberg above the waterline. Below it sits the arms licenses, the defence contracts, the offshore investments, the banking flows that make the relationship so lucrative. And where Israel is concerned, this government cannot grovel low enough. When the government points to the top, therefore, and says that's all there is, it's relying on the rest remaining unseen below the waterline and being unquestioned. Knowledge is power, you see. So I hope I've given you a bit of that now to perhaps ask your own MP about, especially if they're Labour. Politically, one of the few leaders calling this matter out has been Zach Polanski, the Green Party leader, who has said people will be appalled to see that not only have we not stopped arms licenses, we're engaging in everyday business, and that it is totally unconscionable to be treating Israel as everyday business, and these figures showing how we continue to trade with them are appalling. So at least one politician can say it like it is. It's little wonder he is triggering the establishment clinging to these figures in the hope we don't notice what is missing from them, in which case is it? So check out all the details of that story as your next channel recommendation here. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.